Oh yeah. There's delay. So sorry for the little delay. So went to some short prayer. So today, as you know, is the according to the Tibetan calendar, as I mentioned last week. According to the Tibetan calendar, this is very important occasion for three reasons. One is because the Buddha Shakyamuni was born or conceived according to the Tibetan calendar during this day, as well as he got enlightened and then entered nirvana today. So this happens to be the full moon for Tibetan. According to the Tibetan calendar, today is the full moon day, and so therefore we commemorate it. So this morning we had the rituals for the activation of the Mahayana bodhicitta this morning from His Holiness. So I think it was last night for you guys in the United States. So all in all, so today is a very auspicious date. So it so happened that we are having one of our Friday evening Dharma sessions, which happened on the Buddha Shakyamuni's on this very auspicious occasion. So before we begin, I would like to recite a short a 4-line praise to the Buddha Shakyamuni first. And today's okay, so the highlight of tonight's teaching. So I was juggling through 2 different topics, so I couldn't decide on. One is the dependent origination, which is the so there is the dependent origination praise to the Buddha Shakyamuni for speaking on dependent origination by Buddha Shakyamuni, written by Lama Tsongkhapa, which is a very eloquent poem, but a poem that is enriched with philosophical philosophical ideas and philosophical explanations. So it's very profound, and at the same time, I don't know. At the same time, I was thinking of doing the 37 practice of the Bodhisattva, which is, you might say, more or less practical, because it deals with our everyday or our day-to-day life and everyday emotions. But then at the same, the dilemma is that at the root of all our negative forces, there is as Buddha himself said, the root of all negative forces is none other than ignorance itself. And the so-called ignorance is not ignorance or unaware of ordinary things, but ignorance of the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth, which is that all phenomena are empty of having an inherent existence, because they depend upon another object to be labeled, to be verified, to be produced, and so on and so forth. So all phenomena are dependent. All phenomena originate from another object or another subject by depending upon through dependence upon other phenomena, such as labels, conceptual thoughts, the thoughts that conceive such label. In the case of impermanent things, permanent things, permanent phenomena, or in the impermanent things, like cloud and flower and so on and so forth, they are dependent upon their immediate and their immediate causes and conditions. So all phenomena rise from through dependence upon other forms of existence. So I'm still not sure which one to do. I have both books in front of me.
The dependent origination, please.
Okay, sure. Like that was my first choice. Okay, so then we will do the dependent origination, and before that, we will make a short 4-line prayer to Buddha Shakyamuni, as this is such an important occasion, important. So it's called Tabgye Tujema, the one who is so I will just run the first 4 lines, which is so it's also known as praise by way of 12 deeds. Tabgye doje jagye rezo zhong shengye medo mdegye bonjom sergye lumbo dabura jebe ngo shagye jebo jelon chaze lo o mune maha mune yeso ha o mune maha mune yeso o mune maha mune yeso ha o mune maha mune yeso ha. The translation is this, so you can all reflect. Through skillful compassion born in the Shakya clan, unconquered one, subduer of Mara's hordes, your body shining like a pile of gold, king of the Shakyas, homage to you. Masam jume shera baru je maje mega nam je ngo ni so so ran je ye che ju won de zum ge we yom la cha ze lo de a ta ga de parang ga de para sam ga de budi so ha de a ta ga de parang ga de para sam ga de budi so de a ta ga de parang ga de para sam ga de budi so ha de a ta ga de parang ga de para sam ga de budi so ha de a ta ga de parang ga de para sam ga de budi so ha de a ta ga de Barangade Barasamgade Budi so Han Deata Gadegade Barangade Barasamgade Budi so Han Deata Gadegade Barangade Barasamgade Budi so Han Deata Gadegade Barangade Barasamgade Budi so Deata Gadegade Barangade Barasamgade Budi so Ha Sa Ji Böje Chujin Me Do Zham Rabling Shen Yin De Genpa De Sanje Shin Do Mi De Uwa Yi Zhu Guen Nam Da Jing La Zhe Ba Shu Yi Da Mong Guru Ra Nam Da La Gam Ne Yan Da Ya Me Oh La So. So please listen to the following teaching with the proper Mahayana motivation, which is to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Now, with this motivation set, let us delve into the subject of today's, the topic of today's talk, today's session. So that will be in praise of dependent origination, which is the book, as I mentioned earlier, was written. The book or the the poem was written by Lama Tsongkhapa, 14th century master. So Lama Tsongkhapa was born in 1347. 1347. Then, excuse me. So let me go back a little bit into history. So Lama Tsongkhapa was he came from the eastern side of Tibet, western, I think, from the Amdo, and came to the central Tibet and studied there. Completed all of his studies, and by the he went into very deep retreat, and also has a number of great scholarly students of his own as well. And even though he has been studying Buddha Dharma in general, of course, and then especially the Madhyamika tradition, the Madhyamika, the middle way, he has been studying vigorously. And so what happened one night, what happened was, even though he was studying, so he was at a place called Wodikunghil, which is, I think, behind Lhasa. So there, Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa, so he stayed there. I mean, one of the things with Lama Tsongkhapa is that he never stayed too long in one place. So he has been traveling all the time, like staying few months or few years during the deep retreat at one place, and then he would move. So he was staying in the place called Wodikunghil, and he was reading through the Dharma text, especially the Madhyamika text, and he couldn't, even though as much as he, I mean, as I said earlier, he was a great scholar. He has great scholarly students of his own. So he was already a great scholar, great master, great debater. So you can think of that as an esteemed professor in today's time. So he was a renowned, well-published. He also wrote a few books, great volumes of books already before that. On the what is known as the eloquent sayings. So that is a comparative study of all the ancient, the Indian great panditas on the on the subject of metaphysics, or the Brahmana, Paramita, the perfection of wisdom. So he is already well known and published master. So at the same time, he has a great intellectual grasping of the Madhyamika view, but at the same time, he has a hard time gaining intuitive insight into the Madhyamika viewpoint, and that is why, because of that, he was unable to. He still has a slight discomfort in letting go of the grasping into things, grasping into the phenomena that things do arise, things do exist inherently. Things do have an inherent existence. So cutting himself totally, completely from the from adhering to the viewpoint of things arising, things existing inherently, was difficult for him. There was a slight discomfort for him to cut himself completely from this viewpoint. So even though intellectually he can explain, and he can explain very well, but intuitively that was not easy for him to give up the adherence to the inherent adherence to the viewpoint or the attitude of inherent existence. So therefore, he was in a slight discomfort, and you know, when you read a lot and you cannot comprehend the meaning, you know, sometimes we just get stressed out. So in a little bit similar manner, Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa was a little bit in discomfort, and then he went to sleep. And when he went, and in that, on that fateful night, he had a dream where there were the 5 great panditas or masters of the Nalanda tradition, of the, especially of the Madhyamika philosophy. So there was the master Nagarjuna and his student Aryadeva, then Buddhapalita, who is a follower of both of them. So Nagarjuna and Aryadeva are regarded as same, even though they are student and teacher and student. All the other followers regard them as the masters. So even though they belong to different eras, the other masters follow both Aryadeva and Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna and Aryadeva belong to the same era. They are master and student. So there was the Master Buddhapalita and Master Chandakirti, Master Bhavya Viveka. So all five of them were discussing on the profundity of the Madhyamika philosophy. And all of a sudden there was this, so Lama Tsongkhapa has never been to India, and also they were distanced by, there was a huge gap of like a few centuries. So I think maybe a millennia or so. So even though he couldn't recognize who is who, except maybe for Master Nagarjuna, who usually we draw with painting the snakes behind him. So Master, so there was this Pandita, there was this master, there was this individual who is quite large and a little bit dark skinned, and who people refer to as Master Buddhapalita. And so he came around, and then he has this, the big scripture, the scrolls, the big scripture of a textual scripture on his hand, and he put that, he touched that on the head of Lama Tsongkhapa's head. He put that on Lama Tsongkhapa's head, and Tsongkhapa was blessed by that textbook. And because of and it was such an enlightening dream. And when he woke up, he was really excited to reread the text. So he read the. So he usually reads the root lines of Madhyamika, Sawashira, and then also he reads a lot on the Buddhapalita. So Buddhapalita is the name of Acharya Buddhapalita is the name of the author. Acharya meaning master or teacher. Master Buddhapalita's main work is also called Buddhapalita. So he didn't give any specific name to his book. His book is known by his name alone. So that is, so this speaks volumes of his stature actually. And even though that is not the point, in ancient India, the name is not that important. The title is not that important. What is more important is the subject, the content within. So there was, I think I mentioned last week about how Tibetan students were ridiculed by Indian masters or Indian scholars back in Nalanda. So I think one of them was that the Indian counterparts or Indian peers of the Tibetan masters, who they may be quite renowned in Tibet, but when they go to India at the land of wisdom, they're nothing. So when they're with their peers usually would like ridicule or joke around that Tibetans have long name for the books, but short, have long names, long titles, grandiose titles, and short on content, grand on the title and short on the content. Whereas in India, it is short on the title and the grand on the content. So that there was one of them. And in any case, Master Buddhapalita's main work is known by the name Buddhapalita. So Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa went through the book Buddhapalita once more, and when he reached a part where he was explaining the subtle distinction between what is known as the Uma Rangyupa and Tengyupa, the Sotantika Madhyamika and the Prasangika Madhyamika. So within Madhyamika, there are two schools: one which accepts, one which exerts that there is phenomena. There's no phenomena that is ultimately real, but they do exist inherently. So even though we talk about inherent existence all the time, the non-existence of the negation of inherent existence all the time, they usually belong to the Prasangika Madhyamika. because in the field, in the school of the Sudantika Madhyamika, so which is another form of Madhyamika. So within Sudantika Madhyamika, there are another two. There are two more divisions. In any way, so the main division in the Madhyamika school is Prasangika and Sautantrika. And so according to the Sautantrika Madhyamikas, they so the Acharya Buddha Palita was explaining in his masterpiece, which is again Buddha Palita, the very fine detail distinction between the two Madhyamika schools. And so when he reached that part, there was a certain line. So when he reached that part, he has never before sort of eureka moment. So there was this enlightening moment where he has intuitive insight into the Madhyamika viewpoint, and from then onwards, Lama Tsongkhapa never had any discomfort in having the intuitively adhering to the the inherent existence philosophy, the non-existence. From then onwards, Lama Tsongkhapa has no discomfort in adhering intuitively to the non-existence of inherent existence. So therefore, what we call from then onwards, Umetawa Nyeba, this is what we say in Tibetan, which means Lama Tsongkhapa found or had the realization of the Madhyamika viewpoint from then onwards. So what happened next was he was really touched and moved by how profound the Madhyamika viewpoint is. So because it's no longer philosophical, it's no longer academic. So it's much it touches his heart, and it makes it moves him beyond expression. And so therefore he was he wrote this poem dedicated to Buddha Shakyamuni on the on the basis of speaking, on the basis of preaching the ideology or the philosophy of dependent origination. So what happened is, during that time, even though Madhyamika viewpoint is not new during Lama Tsongkhapa's time, one of his most revered master, Lama Umapa. So as the name suggests, Lama Umapa is a great Madhyamika practitioner, Madhyamika view holder, and also his principal human master. So the non-human master is Manjushri. The human master, even though he has about couple dozens of masters, the main human master is Jeju Rendawa, which is a Sakya master. So he also is a Madhyamika view holder, and that too of the Prasangika Madhyamika viewpoint. And even though it is not a new idea, but there was in regard to explanation of the Madhyamika viewpoint is a little bit what we might say too much adherence to the right point, too much adherence to the left, too much leftist. So when we say in the Buddhist philosophy, especially in the Madhyamika, according to the Buddhist tenets, left and right is so the extremes of the left and right. Right meaning realistic, ultimately realistic, and left leaning means that no things exist in reality. So one might say nothing exists ultimately, and then one say nothing really exists. So these two extremes, that nothing exists for real and nothing exists, that all things exist ultimately, everything is excessively out there, or nothing is there, either inside or outside, internally or externally. Because if there's nothing to comprehend externally, if nothing is really out there, then what is there for the mind to comprehend? because the mind, which is the subject, would also be the subject would be devoid of any object to objectify, uh, which sort of negates the very existence of the subject. For one to observe something, for one to become an observer, one needs to have something to be observed. So the thing that is to be observed does not exist ultimately, then the thing that does the observation, the observer, should not exist ultimately, because they are they depend upon each other to so that is one of the debates. In any case, so the two extreme is, one is that things do exist ultimately. Things do exist ultimately. Things do exist inherently, all by themselves, or that no things exist at all. Nothing is real. Nothing is real. So these two extremes, so nothing is real is the left, and the nothing is all things exist inherently or ultimately is the right wing. In which sense, so when the Madhyamika viewpoint came into Tibet, so there was a lot of talk on the Prasangika Madhyamika viewpoint was also brought to Tibet, and there was a lot of let's say fad. So Madhyamika, holding the Madhyamika viewpoint becomes sort of a fad or fashion, a fashionable sort of ideology to sort of like within among the what we might call the intelligentsia, the scholarly and the academia of that era, which precedes Lama Tsongkhapa. The problem or the dilemma. The problem is that what happens is when they talk about the Madhyamika viewpoint, there was too much leaning, as I said earlier, there was too much leaning onto the left side, which is that nothing exists, nothing is really out there. By out there, I mean nothing is really there, nothing is really out there or in here. That since nothing exists on the ultimate level, so if you go look for it, then nothing is there. There's nothing to pinpoint. So the Madhyamika viewpoint of Dembar Mepa, which is non-existence of truth, came to be known as nothing being really out there, nothing being out there. And what happens with the what we call the lower extreme, or the lower extreme, or the left leaning, we have the two extremes, the higher extreme and the lower extreme. The higher extreme is that one leans too much towards the fact that, which is a little bit like materialistic, so that all phenomena exist. Ultimately, all phenomena is really out there. And if something is out there for real, then there should be a mind which comprehends all of them, observes all of them for real. So, which makes both internal and outer external phenomena existing ultimately. So that is one extreme, the upper extreme, and the lower extreme is known as the leaning too much into what one might say nihilism. So what happens with that is, if nothing exists for real, that means karma, the law of causality, does not exist for real. And if the law of karma does not exist, then it does not apply. And so therefore one can do, pretty much anything one likes. And that was the dilemma put forth by the Madhyamika view holders, even in India. And so a lot of the same happened among people who in Tibet. The same thing happened to a number of people, or a number of people who claim to be holder of Madhyamika viewpoint, and then does not adhere to any of the, let's say, the law of the land, or law of nature, one might say. So law of convention, or so they try to do, pretty much So anyway, leaving this aside. So what happened was, what Lama Tsongkhapa did was, the importance of this practice, this book, Dependent Origination. Instead of saying, he could have said, praise to emptiness, right? Praise to the one who spoke of an emptiness, because emptiness is pretty much what Buddha Shakyamuni spoke all the time. He could have said, praise to the one who spoke emptiness, which what we call the Tongkhor, the emptiness side, the empty side. Instead, he decided to praise the Buddha Shakyamuni, exalt Buddha Shakyamuni's virtues by praising on, by choosing to speak on the, by choosing the title Dependent Origination. He chose the side of Nangcho, which is the light or appearance or illuminative. So we have the Nangcho and Tongcho. Nangwa is appear, and Tongkhor is, you might say, disappear. So appearance and disappearance. So the Nangcho and Tongkhor, there are two sides. So when you lean into either of the two sides, there's a problem. And so what happened with the Madhyamika viewpoints prior to Lama Tsongkhapa's arrival is that there was a strong leaning towards the disappearing side. So disappearing is just something that I just came up with. I don't, usually I think they call it emptiness or the empty side. So Tongcho in Tibetan, Tong as in Dongbanyi or emptiness, Tongcho and Nangcho, appearance and disappearance. So we will to simply understand, to simply elucidate the topic, I will say appearance and disappearance. So if you appear too much, there's a problem. If you disappear too much, there's also a problem. So things like law of causality and law adherence to the, let's say, local customs and rules and everything, if you all of these things to disappear, or all of these things start to disappear, then there will be commotion in the community. At the same time, if there's too much appearance, too much leaning onto the appearance side, then what we get is, you know, what we have in, let's say, in America. So there's too much appearance, too much adherence to the appearance, and so from which we come from. So very materialistic. When one leans too much into the the appearance side, then there would be, one becomes too materialistic, and when one leans too much into the disappearance side, the Dongbecho, then one becomes nihilistic. So nothing adheres to that person. So if you had insight into the reality of the ultimate truth, the reality of all phenomena, then of course not adhering to the reality, not adhering to the rules and everything would be okay. But if you do not have a proper insight into the if you are not able to steer the wall of ignorance through proper understanding of the Madhyamika viewpoint, then not adhering to the appearance side, or not adhering to the rule, and not adhering to the common sense, not adhering to the conventional customs and everything, it could prove very dangerous. So Tsongkhapa did a remarkable, let's say, job by deciding to praise Lord Buddha for speaking on dependent origination and not on emptiness, even though they are of the same, they are the same side of the two sides of the same coin. So we will come into that little as we progress in our talk. So Lama Tsongkhapa made this. So what he did was, after he came out of after he came out of his study, after he came out of his, what we call the scriptural retreat, right? So he came out of the his hermitage, and then he decided, he started writing the book. He started writing this poem, praising Buddha Shakyamuni, very, very deeply touched and deeply moved. He wrote this praise to Buddha Shakyamuni, on the basis on the basis of preaching the significance of dependent origination. And this became very popular. So there was a saying, there was one story that goes around in ancient Tibet. So, you know, Tibet being a very spiritual land. So there is also the people who, you know, go for alms, begging around. It's the same thing in India too. They would recite, you know, it depends on the kind of the atmosphere. So if they are entering some monastery, they would recite mantras, the beggars. If they're entering, let's say, if they are going to some community, like a local town or something, they would sing songs, you know, like popular latest Bollywood songs and things like that. So when they come to the monastery, they would sing mantras like Om Mani Padme Hum Mara Patanat. Even though they are not Buddhist or they don't know the meaning, they would recite that mantra. So thinking, kind of like linking us to them through the mantra that they preach. So same thing happened in Tibet. So a number of beggars would recite different kind of mantras, different kind of praise books, and like that. So what happened was, this story goes like that. So there may be a little bit exaggeration or whatever, but this is the story. So there was a great master from the Sakya tradition who was known as Pudun Rinchen or Pudun Tamje Khenpa, Pudun the all-knowing one, the Pudun the omniscient one. So Pudun is said to have written 100 volumes of books. So he's a great scholar. So so there was a saying that when he goes round, when he takes the circumambulation, when he goes round the stupa or some monastery, so he would start reciting. He would start writing. So what happened is, like, great masters of those time, they seldom write themselves. They usually have their scribes write for them. Great masters usually just preach, and then they're, you know, the best of the best student, they would just note it down. So Pudun Rinchen would have 4 scribes sitting on the 4 corners of the temple or stupa. And when he goes round, he would recite, he would read out, or he would just create, or he would just write. He would speak different lines at different corner. And when he is done, when he is done circling, when he is done circumambulation, 4 volumes would come out. So he's so that you think of that as a, you know, great chess masters, you know, would play with a big group of contestants. So he's something like that. So he was a great master. So what happened was, he was sitting by the veranda by his temple, and there was a beggar outside. So he was reciting some scripture. And so the scripture seems to be, if you read Tibetan, it's very nicely, it's very poetic. So the prose is really beautiful. The proses are really beautiful. So he was listening to the words first. It was very flowery word. It was very beautiful words. The wordings, the grammatical structure, and everything was so beautiful. So he kept listening, and he first thought they were saying that this was a praise to Buddha Shakyamuni. But then in the very beginning, there was a praise. There was a paying homage to the Buddha. So he thought, okay, this is not the Buddha then. And then this must be work of some of the great adepts, great yogis, great scholars of Indian Nalanda. And so when he listened, so the beggar actually memorized the praise to dependent origination, because they're actually very good at doing that. So that's their livelihood, right? So they memorize it, and the beggar was reciting it. So he listened, and he was going through the fine points of Madhyamika viewpoint, especially on the Prasangika, the distinction between Prasangika, the distinction between the appearance and the disappearance. So, and he thought, okay, this certainly is the work of Master Nagarjuna. And then there was, as it came down, as the text progressed, there was a praise to Master Nagarjuna. And then, okay, so that is not Master Nagarjuna, then it certainly must be a Chandrakirti. So it went on like that until he made praise to all, not just the Indian masters, but he praised the Tibetan masters, and so on and so forth. So like he was what we call dumbfounded, so he has never heard of someone, so he's never heard of any Tibetan writing such a miraculous or marvelous work ever before. So he went down and gave some alms or some food to the beggar, and then asked him who wrote that. So where you heard it from, and who wrote that? And he has no idea who wrote that, right? So being illiterate, they usually memorize by listening. So they do not know. They just can recite it. It's a taught memory or something, what they call it. So it's similar to parroting. So they can recite it, but they don't know the meaning, the beggars. So where you heard that from, he heard from here and there, and then after that, Pudurang came to know that this was written by Lama Tsongkhapa. And so therefore he was really inspired and, really, really inspired and motivated to see him, Lama Tsongkhapa. And so what happens is, now we will, so this is known, there is another name for this book, the Dependent Origination is sometimes called it the Excellent Sayings, the essence of eloquent sayings. Actually, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the book called the eloquence of the eloquence of definitive and interpretive meaning. So he wrote that book. That is actually an extensive book. And this particular eloquence saying or eloquence, essence of eloquence, is known as the Leishening Wuchua, which is the mini essence of eloquence. The explanation of the definitive and interpretable meaning is known as the greater or the extensive eloquent sayings or essence of eloquence. So this book is also known by the name Essence of Eloquence, but I think that is a name given by later followers, not by Lama Tsongkhapa himself. So now we will begin with the, I don't know how much we can cover today, but we will just begin, start from the prologue or the offering. Namo Guru Manju Kohaya Kanshi Sishin Somba Ye Kendan Jamba Lana Me Gyawa Denjin Dewa Jo Sishin Lomba Telan Dus. So that would be in English. So in praise of dependent origination by Je Tsongkhapa. So the one who's he. So I will just read the lines first. He who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So the first line says that you, or so according to the grammatical structure, it's he who speaks by seeing, or who speaks on the basis of seeing. So in other words, in today's terms, it would be someone who speaks the truth, or someone who speaks upon comprehending it. So one does the one who doesn't speak unless one is sure of the content or the meaning of what it's talking about. So he is not someone to blabber around. So he speaks only what he saws or what he sees. Buddha Shakyamuni. So on the basis of the fact that he speaks only what he saws, or for that matter, he speaks only the things that he sees, and he sees what he what he talks about, he has seen it, meaning that is achievable, that is verifiable, that is the things that he speaks about is not out of context, not out of reach, not incomprehensible. It is comprehensible, it is reachable, and all that. But of course, you have to work onto it. So because he speaks what he sees, and he has seen what he spoke, this makes Buddha Shakyamuni the unequaled, unparalleled in speaking, and unparalleled in knowing or seeing. So he has seen, Buddha Shakyamuni, Lord Buddha, has. So this is in praise to Buddha the Lord Buddha's omniscient mind, which we call Nambatamje Kimba, the omniscient mind of the Buddha, which everything, all phenomena appears before him. All phenomena is naked before him. Nothing is hidden from him. So because of that, he sees the secrets, every minute detail of every movement there is, and every secret there is, he sees them all. And from what he has seen, he grabbed the most essential one for our liberation and spoke that, gave that to us, like picked the essence of all the phenomena that he has seen, and then grabbed it and gave it to us. So because of that, he is. So the grabbing and giving, this is it's reference to his teaching. So from what he has seen, he picked out the most essential one for our liberation and taught us that. Because he has seen everything that makes him seer unparalleled. Because he picked out of everything that he has seen, which covers everything, all phenomena, he picked out the most essential one for our liberation. That makes him teacher or speaker unparalleled. So, so the second line, this makes him a knower and teacher unexcelled. This is what, so this is in reference to that he is a teacher unparalleled, that he's a seer or knower unparalleled, because he has seen everything, he sees everything, and he is a teacher or speaker unparalleled, because he picked out the most relevant thing, the most essential thing for our liberation into from samsara. And to that unparalleled in speaking and unparalleled in knowing. So the third one comes, the third line, I bow to you, O conqueror, who saw. So I bow to you, I bow down to the conqueror. So conqueror is a synonym, is one of the many synonyms that Lord Buddha has. Not just Buddha Shakyamuni, but Buddhas are known by the synonym, the conqueror, the vanquisher or the conqueror, because he has conquered what we call the 4 maras or 4 demons, inner demons, maras. So there is the Pungbudu or bodily mara demon, the death, the demon of death, which is death itself, and the demon of kleshas, Nyamongdu, which is the afflictions, negative emotions, negative forces within us. So, so just think of this as death, the body, the death, and then the life of an extensively long, the extensively long life of a God realm, and and the the bodily, which is the heavenly Mara, which is the afflictive Mara, and which is the bodily Mara, then the Chidagdu, which is the deathly Mara. So you have the heavenly or godly Mara, which in summary talks about the long life, the long life of a God realm. So heavenly Mara, afflictive Mara, deathly Mara, and bodily Mara. So bodily Mara is the degradation of our body, and the Chidagdu, deathly Mara, is death itself, and afflictive Mara is the afflictions that the negative mental emotions, negative emotions that we have within us. So these are the four Maras, or four demons that consumes us. And the Buddhas have conquered all of the four Maras. And when we go deeper, we usually go through the four Maras of the Nyomongdu, Nyomongdushi, which is the four Maras of the afflictive emotions, and then Shijidushi or Shijidushi, which is the afflictive emotions of finer afflictive emotions of the subtler kind, the afflictive emotions. So Shidib means Shidib is the obscuration to knowledge, obscuration to the omniscient. Nyomong is the obscuration. Nyomong is obscuration of the afflictions, and Sheje Diba is obscuration to the obscuration of the omniscient mind. So these two Diba, or these two obscuration, in order to reach enlightenment, one needs to cleanse these two obscurations. One needs to clean those two. One needs to remove those two obscurations. So you can think of the afflictive obscuration as the coarser obscuration, and the second one, obscuration to knowledge, or obscuration to omniscience, obscuration to the omniscience. You can think of that as the finer or subtler form of obscuration, or stain, or or subtler obscuration. So there is the four subtler forms of. If you go deeper, you can delve into you can separate them into the four subtle forms of Maras, and four coarser forms of Mara. In any case, so the four Maras are the heavenly Maras, the bodily Maras, the afflictive Maras, and the deathly Maras. So I'm just simplifying things here. So the Buddhas has conquered. In order to conquer, you have to battle with them first. So this is the thing. Most of the time, we think of the conqueror. It's the conquest. We forget there is a conquest. We forget that there is a battle. So the battle should be fought, and through fighting the battle, we will be able to conquer the opponent, which is the four Maras. So that is something that we should be working towards. And that is why the Buddhas are known as the Gelwa, or the victors. Sometimes they're called victors, or victors or conquerors. So the conqueror who spoke, the conqueror, so the conqueror who saw and taught, the conqueror who saw dependent origination and taught it. So this is, so think of this as someone, okay, someone who sees that, you know, so we don't know what is at the end of the tunnel. It may be something good or bad, and we are all excited about what is at the end of the tunnel. But then there was this guy who actually went out of, came out of the other end of the tunnel, and then came back, across the tunnel, and then came back for us and said, okay, this is there is such and such things at the end of the tunnel, and this is how you cross the tunnel. So he speaks, he says, he reveals what he has seen. And because he has crossed the tunnel, what he has seen is very important for us. And what he speaks, what he reveals to us, is vital, is vitally relevant to all of us. And therefore, for not holding onto the secrets that he has found, for not for not just for not fooling around, if I can put it that way, for not fooling around at the end of the tunnels by himself, he came back and taught us, you know, let us cross together. He actually said, let us cross together by appearing, by manifesting, by emanating in the form of a human body, and appearing as an ordinary human being, albeit one being born as a prince. So he came as an ordinary, you know, when he was first born, he doesn't have that many kind of miraculous things. Even though when we depict the Buddha story, we like to paint a lot of miraculous things on his life story, especially before his reaching enlightenment. I think that actually I think that is a little bit contradictory to what he's trying to tell us. Buddha didn't came into this. Buddha didn't appear in the human. Buddha didn't appear in this world as a celestial being. If you want to portray, if you want to depict the kind of, if you want to show that he has miraculous power, I don't think he would appear in the form of a human being. He could have come in the celestial form, which is very highly revered in India at that time, and he could have done that. But instead, he decided to come in the human form, and then he decided to forego, you know, all sort of things like. He went into, let's say, kind of a depressive moment by seeing people in suffering and so on and so forth. So he went into pretty much everything. It's a very short span of time, like a movie, you know, like one man's life begins and ends in like within 1 or 2 hours. So everything began and ended very quickly, so that we can comprehend it. But he appeared in a very ordinary form. Very ordinary meaning he didn't come in the actual nirmanakaya, the actual enjoyment body form. If he wants to impress us by flowers protruding from every step that he took as we depict them, I think he could have done that in the other forms of celestial body. I think these are our own depiction, our own narrative, our interpretation, because we love him so much. And what we humans tend to do is, when we love someone, when we especially in the spiritual sense, when we love someone, when we really respect and love someone, we try to deify them, make them into gods, and make them have miraculous power and so on and so forth. But Buddha came and explicitly explained and used logic and reasoning, and spoke without using any forms of miraculous power. Wherever he went, he spoke, magic. He spoke on the basis of the Four Noble Truths, on the basis of dependent origination, and so on and so forth. He never used magic. One, I think, so I know I crossed the timeline, but I'm just going to finish by the story, which I think most of you remember. There was the story of the lady who has a stillborn child. So her child died, and she was devastated. And so she came to the Buddha and asked him to revive the baby's life. And Buddha, instead of saying, if he wishes to, if he wants to portray himself as magical and all that, powerful and all that, he could have done it just like that. But instead of reviving the life of the baby, Buddha consoled the mother by saying, okay, first bring a grain of rice from a family that never has seen any death. Which sort of distracted the mother, and she was not crying, she was not devastated. So she found hope, right? Before she was devastated. Now she found hope that something can be done. There is a solution for the revival of the baby's life. And she went around, and everybody is ready to offer one grain of rice, but the problem is no one has unseen death. No one has had no family has a history of someone not dying in their family tree, their family line. And so she went to, I think, all the town, and then finally she came into the realization that death is certain. And then actually that was a huge breakthrough for her. And because we usually tell the the impermanence of death. We always tell, this is the very important thing for a practitioner. So if you look at Lamrim, after the Shinye Tenzu, after the teacher guru devotion, comes the Chewa Midaba, the importance of the impermanence of death. So she actually made breakthrough into had insight into the Chewa Midaba, the death, the impermanence of death. And then she no longer wanted to lead a worldly life. She left the worldly life and become a follower of the Buddha. So the point is that if he could have revived the baby's birth, because we usually have lots of. I'm not saying this is out of question. The revival of life and things like that can be done through tantric methods and all that. By very powerful practitioners, very serious practitioners. Of course, it's doable, and for someone like Buddha, it's doable in the sense it also does not contradict with the theory of law of karma. Buddha is not interfering with the law of causality in the sense that when he revives someone's birth or life, what happens is we have a countless number of incomplete deaths, what we call untimely deaths. So there are a pile of incomplete deaths in our, let's say, life repository, and that can be retracted through tantra practices for ordinary practice people like us, or by sheer miraculous power of enlightened being by the Buddha. And this can be brought forward, and one can have revived extend the life that one wishes to live in this life. So So I will end my talk here. And so today has been a lot of stories. And so hopefully from next session onwards, we will dive quite deeply into the text itself. So thank you very much. And you can ask questions now.
Rinpoche?
Hello. Yes, please go on.
Hello. Yeah. Waiting for others to ask questions, but I don't want to take all the precious time. And
you
I
can be
was
the first
waiting
one.
for others. So anyway, His Holiness last weekend, I don't like to be the first all the time. His Holiness last weekend, it was so powerful. I'm going to start to cry. I hope I don't cry, but I might. The preliminaries
That's okay.
to the Avalokiteshvara empowerment were just so moving. And okay, I'm taking a deep breath. But if I cry, I am fine.
Take your time.
Happy tears.
Take your time.
Happy tears.
Yes.
But it was so moving. It was so moving. And he was talking about dissolving of the aggregates over and over again. And it seems like that's such an important gateway to selflessness. And, you know, so many of us are trying to look deeply into that nature of self. And it's opposite the selfless nature. And it's such a profound idea. But as he was talking about dissolving of the aggregates, are you also dissolving the karmic seeds and imprints at the very same time?
Okay, not necessarily. So dissolving, I think His Holiness, when he's okay. So during the tantra practice, what we by dissolvement, what we during the mind training of the seeing the ultimate reality, the unshackling, the unshackling of the inherent existence thought, the self grasping. The self-grasping attitude. When you are doing that, this is seen as more as a mind training thing. So you untangle each pieces. You remove each pieces that forms up, that combines and that forms up to make a form that builds up to make a form, such as a body, an eye, a nose, and things like that. So it is not necessarily dissolving or removing. So this dissolvement is not in line with dissolution or removal of negative emotion itself directly. But when you when you remove the negative, when you remove the root of all negative forces or afflictive emotion, which is the self-grasping into the inherent existence, then of course the firm belief or the firm intuitive belief into the inherent existence, the firm belief into the inherent existence is shaken, and therefore all the roots, all the bases upon which our negative karma is based, all the basis upon which our negative karma is built upon, is shaken. So when the ground shakes, the building, when the earth shakes, the buildings start to crumble. So in that sense, so there is a so there is that kind of effect. That sort of effect takes place. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. We're just so blessed. We're so blessed that His Holiness provided that to us.
Right.
It's miraculous. So thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Rinpoche, I have a question. You talked
Hello.
about
Yeah.
the Maras. It's John. How are you?
Oh, hi, John.
So it seems like the major impediment to dealing with the four Maras is some sort of craving for for peace, for pleasure. Yet yet the solution does not seem to be not to engage in activities that bring peace or pleasure. So there's a seeming contradiction there. So I'm just wondering how that seeming contradiction, if you see it, and how it's resolved. Is it resolved in terms of the progressive, negation of the the other Maras, or is it some other way?
Right. Can you elaborate a little bit on like what you mean by saying the methods to
so overcoming the obstacles of the four Maras. All right. So that so you might say that overcoming those four obstacles is if you're able to overcome those four obstacles, you have a path to liberation. And you're able to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Okay. Right.
So, but at the same time,
okay.
Yeah. So you get the question now?
Yeah, I did. Okay. So the thing, yeah. So this is a very good question, actually, which actually reminded me of one line from the Kadamba Master, which says, I forgot who he was actually exactly the name. So usually when we do Lamrim, we hear this a lot. So maybe it's Geshe Podo or Geshe Cheka or someone. So the Kadamba Master, he said he was a very practical practitioner. So whatever he's whatever practice he sees he finds interesting, he just applies it instead of just say, oh, it's an interesting one. He would apply it immediately. So he found this. He said that the maras, or the word he used were in Nyumong, which is the afflictions. So the afflictive emotions, the afflictions are such a tricky. The emotions are such a tricky. Let's use the word monster, right? So we should be very, very alert, very on alert, on our feet at all times. So when they appear, I should appear, and when they disappear, I will disappear. When, in other words, when they become fierce, I will become more fierce, and when they start to calm down, I will start to calm down too. So if they appear fierce, I will also appear fierce. If they appear calm, I will also appear calm. So they meaning the afflictive emotions such as anger, hatred, jealousy, and so forth. So within us. So he actually. So this is very important. It's for us. It's easier for us to recognize and get hold of our negative emotions. When we say emotion, or which is the mental faculty, the mental factor. So it is intangible, and so we cannot. It's kind of incomprehensible. It is somewhat. It is intangible, and so therefore it is somewhat incomprehensible, or it is something that we cannot catch hold of. But at the same time, when we sort of itemize them, objectify them into animals or into monstrous beings and so on and so forth, we then can relate to it, because that is what we have been familiarized or conformed for too long. We are what we call the in the desire realm, Devakamba, the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. And within the desire realm, we are very much insinuated by forms, beautiful, good forms, bad forms, beautiful forms, you know, form, sound form, taste form, and so on and so forth. So the maras, when we sort of itemize or objectify the maras in the form of monstrous beings, then it's easier for us to get hold of them and then tame them and then make them calm. And so what happens, so in relation to what you asked and what the master said, the nyomong or the afflictive emotions are very cunning and they are very scheming. And so therefore we should be very resourceful ourselves in order to fight our negative emotions, in order to fight our maras, because the maras appears, as the name suggests, the mara appears in form of very friendly people, beautiful, and speaking nice word and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they are luring you, they're seducting you and luring you into the pit of downfall. So therefore, they are very scheming, and if they feel like you are very angry, they will, you know, lure you by saying some nice word, calming you down, and then lure you into the pitfall. If they see you as being crestfallen, so this is where ego comes, right? Like when you are deep down, when you're depressed, or when you are crestfallen, then ego comes in the form of let's say pride, or in the form of in Tibetan we call it boba, which is I think pride is the right word. So it comes in the form of pride and tells you, okay, what you did was right thing, and so on and so forth, and then we are able to get up. So to some extent, pride is useful. Ego can be useful, but if we go along all the way with our ego, so ego is one of the monsters, one of the maras, and so they can, to a certain extent, like a boat, to a certain extent, they are quite useful. If you know how to maneuver them, they are useful, and you should be able to maneuver them. And after a certain point, you have to give them up. So ego is also like that. Ego, like many of the monstrous maras, is also very scheming, and they can lure you when you are really down. When you are really down, they will lure you and then make you feel uplifted, and so on and so forth. And that's why, so this is, anger is also like that. When you lose something, your loved one, or some possession of yours, or whatever, anger appears in the form of revenge, or you know, so you know, do the right thing, justifying the actions. So what has been done to you is so unjust that taking a revenge will somehow make it right. But we all know it's not true. Too unjust thing doesn't make up to a just thing. But then when we are carried away by negative emotions, which is scheming, which is very clever, which is very cunning. So the monsters, so the maras are, in other words, the mara can appear in different forms, but they are really cunning and monstrous. And so therefore, the method to deal with them should be monstrous as well. Even though we meant well, the method should be monstrous or scheming or cunning, depending upon, so think of mara as your own reflection. So when the reflection is very much in the wrathful form, you need to deal it with a wrathful method to get it calmed down, and so on and so forth. So that's why the method should be wrathful.
Okay, so from that, you know, one can say it's not a matter of eliminating negative emotions; it's using them, perhaps, to develop skill so that they're not an impediment to what one, you know, is, you know, wants to do, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting because, you know, you say that you know, you need to use the same kind of degree of force, you know, and, you know, what's really interesting about all this is, you know, is in a world where ethics is, you know, kind of so challenged and so necessary, but challenged, and there's little agreement, and there's every attempt to, you know, eliminate it, and just go with, you know, some people say the data, you know,
right.
that the data points the way. And that ends up, you know, being reflected in, you know, how people are treated and segmented in society. So, you know, so this is kind of saying, you know, I mean, so this is interesting that, you know, any sort of ethical discussion is interesting, you know, if you examine what the basis is and you can accept it and it can be acceptable to others. So to me, this, you know, you're talking about degrees, you're talking about kind of a spectrum that is not absolute on one side or the other. So anyway, we can talk about it another time.
Oh yeah, sure. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks.
I didn't have a question, but I just wanted to say your detail and knowledge on the subject and the way you speak is very eloquent, and thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you so much. Are you the one who suggested this teaching?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a lovely book.
Yes, it is, and it will get more interesting as we progress with it.
I don't know it, so.
Me neither. So we're just gonna discover it together.
I have a question, Rinpoche.
Yes, please.
Is there time?
Oh yeah. Sure. Please go on.
As a follow-up to John's question, it sounded like John was asking if it's okay to have afflictions of mind, and the degree is, he thought you were talking about the degree of afflictions. I heard it a different way. I thought you were talking about a way to eliminate the afflictions. Was I mistaken?
It seems.
I think I was talking about ethics, you know, and you know, kind of knowing, you know, what is acceptable and what isn't. So not so much saying that you know, the suffering of the afflictions is acceptable. I think, you know, the underlying premise here is that it's not acceptable. It's not our true nature, right?
Right.
And it comes from, you know, causes and conditions, right?
Right.
So that's very important. So that's not the kind of the spectrum I'm talking about. It's really, you know, how do you teach people and have them, you know, have some sort of faith or reliance on the possibility of ending their own suffering and treating other people and not creating suffering, right? Which is what we're talking about here.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. So
I
was
you
more,
know, yeah. Go ahead.
I was right. I was more or less talking about the monstrosity of the four maras, and the level of damage it does and can do to us, and in our journey, or in our on our path to enlightenment. And so therefore, you know, it is not the maras, you know, which is sometimes translated as illusion. So our illusion are not what they seem, right? So Mara can appear in very touching and moving and nice forms, but it doesn't really mean, if you look further into it, if you delve further, if you look deeper, then that is not the real case of Maras. So a number of our emotions, which we call instinctive emotions, which we, I mean, before we touched before we embraced Buddhism, we usually think of number of those emotions as our safeguarding. Is that the word? We feel like a number. Sorry.
Protective,
and survival tools. You know, a number of our like. So I think that maybe that is because from where we came from, because in the beginning, like we came from the prehistoric, the primitive hunter to what we are now. So because of that, we need to be alert and we need to hunt down the animals that threaten our life and family and so on and so forth. So there is always this instinctive nature within us that has become instinctive, not because that is our very nature, but it has become our instinctive because that is what we have been doing for millennia. So because of that, there are those. So the afflictive emotions, afflictions, the maras, cloaked in the maras are cloaked in protective mental factors, and we feel like when we seek their help, when we seek their assistance, when we seek the assistance of our maras, we feel like we are actually doing a good service, a good thing for ourselves, for our body, for our mind, for our livelihood, and all that. But actually, in the true sense, we are actually doing a disservice, not a good service to our very livelihood or anything. So I think that was what I was that is what I was saying. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I will conclude here today. Thank you very much for everybody for participating. So let's just conclude by saying one dedication. Changju semjo rembo che ma ye banam ge juro che ge ba nyamba be ba yang kone kondo be ora sho. So the merits gained from this teaching, those who had not generated bodhicitta be able to generate bodhicitta, and those who had generated bodhicitta, altruism towards all sentient beings, be able to expand them and embrace all sentient beings within the scope of their love and altruism. Thank you.